Thank you, Max. Now switching gears to the Show Me State. That's where Missouri candidates are releasing more political ads ahead of next month's primary election. Some Republicans are even facing backlash for focusing on illegal immigration. Bill Eigel is the latest state candidate to release an ad attacking that immigration. But other candidates, including Vivek Malik and Holly Reeder, have made it their platform. A Jackson County lawmaker says the ads are isolating to Mexican Americans. When asked if that were true and if he went too far, Eigel defended his stance.
I don't know why it's offensive to want to enforce immigration law in our country. I think that Republicans, really folks all over the country, appreciate that type of candor, which is what you saw on display in the ad.
The reality of these narratives, primarily used by the Republican Party in an anti-immigrant, anti-Mexican, anti-Mexican American, in my viewpoint, way, is very damaging to not only the communities that I represent, but I also am a part of.
A U.S. House committee concluded that the average undocumented immigrant creates a financial impact of about $68,000, but the report clarifies this is not due to laziness or fraud.